And he's gone, wow. So, yeah. You actually do need 3,000 gold to recruit Volk, and he will disappear if you talk to him without having enough. I guess I'll show Alincia's version of that too while I'm here. Wow, that one's even shorter than the last one. Okay then, no more messing around, we finally return to your regularly scheduled programming.
Welcome back to Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn. It's almost time for the finale. We've all arrived at the Tower of Guidance, but we need some time to prepare first. And preparations are going to be so involved here, I'm going to make them their own part, just to warn you. Anyway, let's go.
Ike and company managed to evade their persistent foes, finally arriving in Cien, the capital of Benyan. The Tower of Guidance. According to the creed of the goddess, which has been taught across the continent by Benyan, this is where the goddess Ashura will appear during times of great crisis to lead the people to safety. As even the smallest child in Benyan knows, the tower is sacred, and mere mortals may not enter. With the world edging toward catastrophe, the tower glows like a pillar of pure light, as though to pierce the very heavens.
Endgame just has one title here, but it's really 5 chapters. And yep, that's definitely ominous. The Tower of Guidance has had focus ever since the opening movie of Path of Radiance, but it's never really been important until the second game. So in the extended script, Mist always has a line in this scene in addition to Titania and Soren. In this version, you can still see Mist's lines, but they require Titania to not be present. Well, that's a doorway to the final confrontation if I ever saw one. Funny how Scrimmy is acting as the spokesperson for Team Micaiah, not, you know, Micaiah or Nasala. Or Sanaki, for that matter. So, in the extended script, Sanaki mentions why they know nothing about the numbers or strength of the enemy. There's a magic barrier around the city. Nasala also speaks here in the extended script. Seems like they got delayed longer than expected fighting Izuka. You'd think I could be the team delayed due to, you know, 4-4. No, they wouldn't give us a battle before the base. Yep, it's allies. And yeah, if Janeth was with Tiban's group, he shows up here. I love this line from Kanegas. Do we get experience for that? Apparently the answer is no. Oh, hi, Yune. Still popping in out of nowhere as always. Yune, have you seen the Part 4 chapters before Endgame? If that's faster than we thought you would, how little faith did you have in us? So yeah, good news, Yune recruited Kanegas to our side. Bad news is this. And good line from Tiban here. We just had to fight dragons in the final chapter of a Fire Emblem game, didn't we? In the extended script, Yune mentions that some of the dragon elders were turned to stone, but apart from that, everyone sided with Ashura. Kind of an interesting note, and if they were old enough to be turned to stone, considering how old Deginsia is and the fact that he obviously wasn't, they must have been around for a really long time. According to the art book, Deginsia is the dragon equivalent of 50. Oh, I believe there's an extra line here in the extended script about we have to make sure we're prepared before we face the dragons or we're all dead. But now it's time for the final base of the game. We will still have access to the award experience and skills menus while we're in the tower, so you don't need to worry about spending all your bonus experience now, but... oh yeah, and also supports. We'll still be able to build supports while we're in there too. But if you want to buy or sell things, now is kind of your last chance. And it's also your last chance to mess with the inventories of anyone who's not going into the tower. But I'll talk about that later, because for now we have some info conversations. A lot of info conversations. I guess I'll do the 1-star info conversations first. Both of these are... Stefan's is actually great. I guess we'll do Stefan's first. So this conversation still takes place even if you didn't recruit Stefan, and he still shows up here, but you just get a few extra bits of dialogue where people are like, "Who are you?" And he's like, "I just showed up here randomly." He doesn't join you though. If she didn't create Laguz nor Bjork, then what exactly did get created by the goddess? We'll find that out later. Actually, there are hints at that revelation in Path of Radiance, but the full details of it are not going to come out until Endgame. And yes, the Branded, that's the topic of discussion for this conversation. Yune only found out about Branded relatively recently, which also implies that Ashura only knew about them recently too. That's kind of significant, and this line's also significant because yes, Amy is heavily implied to be a Branded. And that leads interesting implications to that line about, are there rules about who gets turned to stone and who doesn't? It seems like Branded are more likely to resist the effects. Now, I'm not sure whether all Branded escape petrification. The majority of them are in Stefan's village or in Hatari, so it makes sense why that wouldn't have really been noticed anywhere, but you'd think there'd be at least some Branded in Bednion, unless, disturbingly, they're all found and exterminated by now, which is sadly probably true. One other thing though, if there are Branded in Dayan, we need to hope that Lekane doesn't find out, because then people will die if he invokes the Blood Pact on us. Stefan explains this in his support from the last game. Stefan is not directly a half-blood. He had some Lagoo's ancestry very far back in his family. For others, though, it's more direct. For example, Ashnard's descendant would be direct branded, but most of the people we know, it was just somewhere back along the line. Now, Stefan's Lagoo's ancestor is actually kind of interesting. I think I'll be talking about it a bit later during Endgame, where they explain some things about the past, but Stefan's Lagoo's ancestor is actually pretty important. Now, this is interesting because I know I've probably said this before, but this is very similar to how brands work in Genealogy and by extension Awakening with the brand of Naga. This leads to some interesting implications. Maybe the Dragon Tribe here eventually became the Manichetes after thousands of years. So Stefan is listed as being around 29 in appearance. I personally think he looks a bit older than that, but he's definitely older. And there has been developer info that's actually said exactly how slowly different types of branded age. Herons are very slow. I think herons are the slowest next to dragons. And the ones who age closest to Bjork are the Beast Tribe branded. So I think Stefan is roughly double his physical age, or it could be 1.5 times his physical age. I like to think Stefan's around 60, personally. So the unnatural powers, it seems to vary. In Stefan's case, he's just very good with a sword. And in some people's case, it manifests as being decent with magic. Micaiah seems to have inherited a lot of typical Heron abilities, like being able to sense feelings. So yeah, different branded powers work differently. And this is in fact significant, because if you remember Soren back in Path of Radiance, he mentions how Soren ended up in Gallia, and there he was treated like he didn't exist. Yeah, we've heard about this too. This explains why not everyone immediately figured Micaiah out. It's this moment in particular that makes me love this conversation so much. I just find it really interesting, the idea that someone who's known a particular religious tenet for so long actually meets the god behind that religion and asks them about it, and they're like, what? I never said anything about that at all. It's just kind of interesting how history got distorted by humans along the line in this universe. I don't know, I find that conversation really interesting. And just the way that the gods are portrayed in this game, I really like. And these two are now reuniting. Interestingly, this line doesn't change regardless of whether he's alive or dead, I think. And it has very different implications, that means, depending on which it is. If he's dead, it's obvious, but if he's alive, maybe Almeida's recently realized that he's not really her son. And Ina's back. This is actually significant, because Ina has actually joined our party now. I'll be showing that after I get through the base conversations. And we finally get to see these two interact. It reminds me a little bit of Matthew and Jafar's interactions in FE7. And again, I still find Almeida one of the saddest characters in this game because she's just so far gone that she wants people to hate her. It's just... like, there are a lot of people in real life who struggle with this, who just get so, like, their depression gets to such a point that they feel like they're just begging that others should hate them because they feel that they deserve it. Finally seeing you again since Goldoa. Well, at least now we know 90 years is considered a long time for dragons, while 3 years isn't. So, warning, giant exposition dump incoming. Turns out Nasia's particularly good at that, we'll be seeing another one of these later. I forgot just how long this base conversation went on for. So Nasia's basically going to explain everything that went on in Goldoa during Path of Radiance. And some of this game too. And that explains where all the Red Dragon Feral ones we fought in the last game came from. It actually takes a lot of strength for him to do that. Unfortunately, just when we thought Teginsia was getting likable, he does this. So, apparently Kurthnaga going onto Micaiah's side for one battle caused Teginsia to say, yep, you've violated this, we have to kill everyone now. Yeah, in fact, the reason why he went on to Micaiah's side was if the Blood Pact got invoked, there was a chance Almeida would die. And Lekhane's the one responsible for all of that, so really can't blame Kurthnaga for doing that. However, the fact that the dragons don't know this, that's something they probably need to be told. Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't really make that much of a difference given what Ashura has decided to do. Yeah, so in this game, the Dragon Tribe, they tried to go for, like, complete, absolute, lawful neutral with the Dragon Tribe. And how effectively it worked is highly debatable. A lot of people really do not sympathize with what the dragons do in this game. Though admittedly, many of the characters in-universe point that out, like Kurthnaga's doing right here. Good news is, thanks to the whole pacifism system in this game, we won't have to worry about that. If we do end up fighting Nasir, he won't be able to attack Nasir. He won't be able to attack Ina or Kurthnaga. Yeah. But let's ignore that for the moment and go on to some slightly more positive conversations. Though personally I feel that these base conversations don't quite cover the breadth that the ones before the final battle in Path of Radiance did. At least we get a bit of a reunion among the Crimeans. Including one who we haven't seen in a very long time. Yeah, Bastion was the one who essentially did all that to save him. That's actually kind of interesting. They don't really elaborate on that, but yeah, it turns out that Renning's the reason Bastion was able to study magic, I guess. This line actually gets quoted quite a lot, although I saw a long time ago someone on Serene's Forest forums had made a different version that was your sword, armor, and your faithful Bidoof stand ready, and it was for Makalov. Someone on the forums liked to joke that Makalov was a knight who rode Bidoofs. It's weird. Also, the weird thing about that line, isn't Renning already wearing his full armor? I chalk that up to just portrait limitations. So yes, Renning is actually joining us here, and that's why this conversation is 3 stars. Unlike everyone else who joins before endgame, he's not with you by default, you have to view this base conversation. Well, Alincia isn't anymore either. Of course, the player can be a jerk and let Renning die and have Alincia lose another relative, so don't do that. And the men have all gone off to have practice fights. That's a nice conversation overall. I'll be showing Renning's stats later. And this conversation is something that's been a long time coming. Oh, by the way, Gifka's here. He's just doing what he does best, just being there and not really saying much, and just generally being a shadow. And finally, we get this. A weapon we've seen all throughout the series, and if you played Heroes, you were probably wondering when we get this. It's not until now. So we get Irvan. This is the SS Axe. It's extremely powerful, though only one range, and Ike is capable of reaching an SS rank in axes, so fittingly, Ike can use this if you want him to. Personally, I'd just like to keep him with Ragnall, but it's pretty cool to see Ike use Irvan. In fact, it's especially satisfying to do a certain fight later on in Endgame with it. And now this one. Finally, Ike gets to interact with Volk. I still picture this guy being voiced by Steve Bloom. And since Bastion's still with us, Volk gets to go with us now. Let's just hope Volk never gets hired to take out any one of us in the future. We could definitely use some money before the very end. Which turns out to add up to quite a lot, actually. Radiant Dawn is nowhere near as generous with gold as Path of Radiance was. But it's still nowhere near as stingy with it as Conquest is. So I'll be thankful for that at least. And yeah, something that's been pointed out to me many times, or at least that I found out having watched Japanese footage of Path of Radiance, but the massive amount of gold that it gives you makes more sense in the Japanese version when forging was crazily expensive. They halve the cost in the English version, so it's nowhere near as bad, but in the Japanese version, it's still very possible to run out of gold in Path of Radiance, because forging is just that expensive. And Volk is slightly tsundere, that's interesting. So yeah, he took 30,000 of that, we only get to keep 20. But that's all the base conversation's done, and with that I'm actually gonna just freaking save now, because yeah, that is a lot of dialogue to get out of the way. First thing to do after all that is, if we go down to the bottom of our characters list, and by the way, yes, we have everyone now, including some new faces. 5 to be exact, so yeah, buyer's time. We have Kanagus. We've been waiting a long time for this guy to finally join. He sent an understudy in his place in the final chapter of Path of Radiance, but now he's here in person, and oh boy was it worth the wait. Just look at those stats. Do I really have to say anything more? And seriously, those caps! The speed of a true blade or an assassin, with strength and defense far higher than marshals, dragon lords, reavers. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say Kanagus has some of the best physical caps in the entire Fire Emblem series. Kanagus' only real weakness is not having 1 to 2 range. That and being slightly weak against magic, though with how much HP he has, his low resistance isn't that much of a problem. Oh, and also he has Earth Affinity. Just seriously, what more could you ask for, besides 1 to 2 range, like I said? Kanagus is basically your first make endgame easier button. Gifka, who by the way, even though it just says Lion and he's not a royal, this is actually a custom class, so all 3 lions you get technically have different classes. And Gifka is essentially a second Kanagus. So if you want to make endgame really easy, deploy both of them. Their stats are slightly different, with Gifka focusing a little more on speed, but when both their stats may as well be replaced with yes in everything except maybe magic and resistance, it's not like that's saying much. Gifka is not a royal, but he does have a custom version of the Lion class that has Kanagus' caps and a Great Fang, and he starts with a Lagoo's gem, so he might as well have Form Shift. I actually like his starting skill better than Kanagus', Nullify rather than Fortune, Because let's be honest, are criticals really gonna be that dangerous to Kanagas? I don't think he needs Fortune. Nullify though can help against fire mages. Mages in endgame are actually pretty dangerous. But overall, Gifka is, like I said, a second version of Kanagas, so if you thought he was ridiculous, you can have two of him. Fun fact about Gifka, because he joins in Path of Radiance with capped strength and at level 20, if you're doing a transfer file, simply picking him in Path of Radiance guarantees him +2 strength in Radiant Dawn. Kurthnaga? After seeing him blow up a castle during part 3, you'd expect Kurthnaga would be pretty impressive once he joined, right? Well, not exactly. If he joined far earlier in the game, he'd probably be pretty good, but as it stands, he joins as a very low-level Laguz in endgame, and requires a ton of training to be useful. And again, it's currently endgame. I have no idea what ran through the developers' minds when they decided to give you a character who required this much training during endgame, where you're expected to have a fully trained third-tier party, but they did, I guess. It's a shame because Kurthnaga's the only black dragon you get, and they do look very cool, and they do have great caps. If he joined at the proper time, he could have been decent, but sadly he doesn't. On the plus side, while he is forced into your endgame party, he doesn't take up one of its optional slots, so he's essentially a free deployment. But it's a good thing for him that you don't have to deploy him in every endgame chapter, because there's usually not much point. Now, all the dragons who join in this game come with a skill that buffs all allies adjacent to them. This makes the majority of them usable for reasons besides their stats, but for Kurthnaga, he again gets the short end of the stick by having the worst buff skill out of all the dragons, Night Tide. All this gives is +5 defense and resistance, which in the grand scheme of things is not that much, especially since endgame has terrain types that give +10 defense or resistance. You're much better off making use of those. On top of all that, Kurthnaga is not technically a Laguz Royal. At least, not yet. So he's still bound by the limitations of the transform gauge. Now I would like to mention that I am in fact insane. I've trained Kurthnaga before, on my first playthrough at that. So to anyone who wants to do that, I'm going to give a few tips. Firstly, you might need to save a secret book because Kurthnaga's accuracy sucks early on. In fact, it's so bad that he's one of the few characters who benefits from the otherwise useless Heaven Affinity supports. For this reason, I supported him with Alincia. He also needs Paragon, obviously, and the main place you want to train him is Endgame 3. None of the enemies in that entire chapter will counterattack Kurthnaga, so you can easily abuse them for free experience. All in all, it's not really worth it, but it is kind of fun to have a black dragon in the final chapter. But they still could have done so much more with him if only he'd joined earlier. One final thing though, the hobby and talent that I've listed under Kurthnaga's profile here, which I translated from the Path of Radiance art book, are probably wrong because they don't fit Kurthnaga at all. My guess is they copy and pasted Deginsia's profile and forgot to change those two parts of it. Ina? Statistically, Ina is bizarre. She's a red dragon, which is a physical class, but has much higher magic than strength. I guess she can do decent damage with magic cards and heal ridiculous amounts of health with Imbue, but neither of them is particularly useful, so for the most part, Ina's pretty bad in combat. However, she's still very useful to deploy, unlike Kurthnaga, because she comes with 2 utility skills. The first is Boon, which is the same as it was in Path of Radiance. Adjacent allies get cured of status problems at the start of every turn. This is very useful in Endgame 1, which is full of status staves. The second is her dragon buff skill, Blood Tide, which gives +5 strength and skill to all adjacent allies. This really helps your physical fighters break through the enemies a lot quicker, and it's vital to quickly defeating the final boss as well. So while Ina may not be very good in combat, she's worth deploying just for those 2 skills. Just make sure you give her a Laguz Stone, otherwise she will die very, very quickly. Oh, and like Kurthnaga, none of the enemies in Endgame 3 will attack Ina, so if you want to grind her, feel free to do it against them. And finally, from the base conversation, Renning. Haven't trained a Gold Knight by this point and really want one in Endgame? Well, that's what Renning's for. Yeah, you get the idea. Radiant Dawn loves to throw filler characters at you towards the very end. Renning is the one for cavalry. Unfortunately, I don't find Gold Knights to be a particularly amazing class in endgame, just due to their overall caps being kind of low. But Renning he's alright, he has some decent base stats and comes with an SS rank in swords. So just like both Stefan and Bastion, he's a minimal investment option if you just need a filler unit for endgame. Though granted, if you have some filler slots in your endgame team, they're probably better filled with Laguz Royals than Renning. But at least Alincia's uncle is alive and well and actually playable, that's gotta count for something, right? Fun fact about Renning, he's actually coded to be able to use Amity. This makes sense given that he's also a Crimean royal, however, since Amity is locked to Alincia's inventory, Renning can't actually use it without hacking. So, that is pretty much it.